there's lessons to be learned, not just for Buffalo politics, but just the broader progressive movement. So I wanted to start with, India Walton. I think a lot of people who might have just top line looked at it like, oh, she won the primary, so she'll probably win the general. And maybe just weren't paying attention on the ground, didn't know all the intricacies of, well, yes, she won the primary, but the current mayor kind of just gave it to her, like didn't actually campaign. Not that she didn't work hard for it, and it was still an accomplishment for her to win, but she basically had to run two primaries. I mean, the general election was just a redo of the primary, only with the mayor actually campaigning and money flooding in for that mayor from big business, from the real estate, who's who of the real estate developers and Republicans. So can you kind of talk about that dynamic where, like, yeah, she won the primary and that was a score for the left, but the general was basically her rerunning the primary, only with the mayor full throttle campaigning against her and all the money that poured in against her?
Yeah, I think unfortunately I'm cursed with a long lifetime of Buffalo roots, and in sports that's typically a curse. But I kind of, to press that sports analogy a little bit more, and real ones will know this. India Walton's loss is kind of our wide right as far as the left. This is coming within a hair's breadth of victory and just completely missing, a gimme field goal. And I think that the struggle here is that a lot of folks that aren't familiar with the dynamics of Buffalo, which really is, I think, one of the last genuine machine cities in the United States, in the kind of classical sense, because I think that there are definitely, political machines that operate, but not in kind of like the old school kind of electoral machine kind of way. And that definitely is how Buffalo operates. And, I've been personally waiting for Byron Brown to go down for well over a decade. I think that there are a couple of things that we highlighted that are a little bit easy to miss if you don't really know the context that deeply. And also, I think some of the unfortunate kind of warning signs that we highlighted. Walton definitely, ran an incredible primary campaign. And realistically, Brown has had a lot of primary challengers and election challengers, and this was the first, what I would say, credible threat he's ever faced. They actually ran field. They ran a movement candidate that had connections in the community, that had a lot of energy from grassroots activists that have kind of seen the the fruits of neoliberalism in Buffalo, that have seen that the so-called, development of Buffalo really has not benefited working class Buffalo equally, because the poverty rate is pretty much exactly what it was in 2010. Even while they're trumpeting this so-called, revitalization, it's not a revitalization enjoyed by everyone. It's really a revitalization for the middle class and for the wealthy. And so she managed to run a real campaign with a lot of real grassroots enthusiasm. And realistically, Brown didn't take it seriously. And that's not to say that that's the only reason she won, but she definitely benefited from the fact that Brown, like a lot of entrenched incumbents who have won, upset losses to progressive challengers, whether it's, Joe Crowley or Elliot Engel, she benefited from him kind of being a little bit asleep to the actual threat. The problem there, I think, is that unlike a lot of places, especially New York City, where you do have a pretty robust kind of left-wing infrastructure, whether it's DSA or Working Families Party, which realistically doesn't exist as a credible electoral force in Western New York. Union members may vote on the WFP ballot line, but they really don't have any clout the way they do in downstate New York or, places like the Capital District. And so basically you had this surprise upset at the highest kind of like city office, like the first socialist to have a credible chance of winning executive power in a city of that size in a long, long time. And they didn't have the infrastructure to be able to really kind of put together a machine that would allow them to continue that momentum into the election once Brown had kind of clued into the threat and had made the decision not to concede the election. And realistically, there just isn't that much progressive or left-wing infrastructure in Buffalo. It just isn't there. There are a lot of reasons for that.
I wanted to add
Yeah.
also, because something I was seeing on the ground and I've seen elsewhere, there's not, I mean, bottom line, the establishment and the financial tentacles, there is widespread organization for corporate candidates, whether it's in Akron and Cleveland, where Nina Turner was just flooded with money. Not the only reason, she lost, but a major reason. Whether it's in Buffalo, wherever, but there's not that core race to race progressive infrastructure. You know, technically, our revolution was kind of sort of aiming to be that. When I say infrastructure, I mean to help with not just the funding, but the canvassing, the direct marketing, the polling, you know, that kind of thing. There's not that. So when I saw India Walton running, there were two issues. A, Byron Brown had the business elite, the real estate elite, the media, which just being there for a week, it was very clear
Oh, yeah.
the media was in the tank
Oh,
for
yeah.
Byron Brown, and giving him significant deference in just pretty much every broadcast, almost acting like there wasn't even a primary and that she wasn't the Democratic nominee.
Absolutely.
But I also wanted to zero in, because your piece kind of talked about that she ran as a movement candidate in the primary, and you know, strong messaging of kind of just soaking it or socking it to the business elite, you know, changing the game in terms of not handing out contracts to real estate developers. But then when she won and Brown started, you know, seriously challenging in the general election, she kind of tempered that and kind of, I wouldn't say completely walked it back, but kind of underscored, you know, didn't talk about that she's a socialist that much. She didn't talk about, you know, she kind of tried to make herself a little bit more palatable to the business elite. So to me, on a broader scale, was that, I mean, she lost by 17 points, so there's got to be more than one reason. But was that a mistake? Should she have just ran the same campaign in the general that she ran in the primary?
Yeah, you know, I think that, and, you know, I think that you're right that there are a lot of reasons, but I don't think that she did herself any favors by kind of moderating that message, because one of the things that kind of was continually, I couldn't quite figure out what was happening, is that there was a lane open for her to court labor union support over the summer. They were really kind of holding back from confirming that they were behind Brown, with the exception of the building trades, which they were going to be in the tank for Brown no matter what. But there was a lane available, and I think that there was a way to connect some of her more progressive message to the concerns that a lot of unions have. Because realistically, you know, the neoliberal program has, especially for public sector workers, just, you know, created carnage for them. And, you know, I think that there was a way to, one, take that message and push it to some of these unions that would have been appealing to them, but also, you know, push unions to maybe behave a little more progressively than they historically have in Buffalo, which I think is a win-win for both labor and for the left. And that just never happened. I mean, she really kind of backed off of it. And, you know, there are a lot of ready-made narratives available about charter expansion, which, you know, would have solidified her support from Buffalo Teachers Federation, which ended up, even though they endorsed her in the primary, ended up not endorsing her for the general election. They stayed out of it. And then also appealing to municipal workers that realistically, you know, one of the things that happens because of a lot of this development that has tax abatements is you have huge development that's stressing municipal infrastructure, but you have no money to actually, you know, pay for the added stress on the municipal infrastructure. And so you have municipal workers that are stressed. They've had insufficient wage increases. They're dealing with a crumbling infrastructure. And yet, you know, you're handing out all of these deals for developers that are just increasing the pressure over and over. And so there were ways to connect these issues, but if she had embraced the message that helped her win the primary, But instead, she decided to back off of those things and try to kind of ease the minds of small business owners, of property developers, really to her detriment. I mean, Buffalo Teachers Federation never explicitly said what caused them to not endorse her for the general election. And I would imagine there's no single factor, but it did come after she went in front of business leaders and said that she supported school choice and that, you know, she didn't really have any problem with charters. And that was their big issue. That was why they backed her originally, and she backed off of it. And so I think that is kind of the struggle, is that realistically, the infrastructure that's going to help you win in Buffalo is organized labor. And she was never going to get a majority of the unions, but she could have gotten, I want to say she could have gotten more, but I think that it would have required her to stay on her message and actually connect that directly to the issues they're facing. And I think that by kind of backing off of that and trying to, you know, reassure Capitol that, no, I'm not a threat, it really just didn't do her any favors.